Good afternoon for today's TechXtend webinar series. My name is Dave Herskowitz, Sales Director at TechXtend, and I just wanted to do a quick introduction. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar series is going to address Bulk Editor. We're going to have an introduction and some case studies around that solution. Before we get into that, just a quick agenda. We're going to go over who we are briefly as far as TechXtend in the industry space, followed by Bulk Editor, presented by Victor Rodriguez, who's our data management and data warehousing and consultant with TechXtend. Following that, we will have a questions and answers period and then a brief summary. TechXtend, who some of you may have remembered it from Programmer's Paradise, now we're formerly TechXtend. We're a leading e-seller of developer and infrastructure tools. You can visit us online at www.techextend.com. We have a database worldview ecosystem, which we're going to present in the next slide, which kind of outlines how we play in this space, which applies to the tools that we're talking about today. We're an elite CA partner, #1 data modeling reseller for CA, in fact. We have a dedicated CA sales and engineering team on site. Welcome to use them to your advantage, and they're at our disposal. We have a database modeling and infrastructure design and training service that we offer as well. We're a leader in delivery of CA education and authorized VET and VSA partner. This slide is the ecosystem that I was briefly mentioning in our last page. This is our what we call worldview, and this is a complete solution of all of the different tools at our disposal around database platforming. You can see we have industry-leading tools for your end-to-end development needs, and this covers a lot of different areas here. And we have these on our website as well, so feel free to browse those at your convenience. What I'm going to do now is pass it over to Victor Rodriguez, who's going to take over the Bulk Editor presentation of our webinar series today. Thanks, Victor.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody, for attending. And as Dave mentioned, we are going to be covering the functionality. This is something new in the ERwin R8 release with the ERwin Bulk Editor. I do see some of you already starting to ask questions, and please do ask your questions in the Q&A area, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can by the end of our, at the end of our session today. So let's take a look at the outline of our agenda for the day, and I do have control. Great. The agenda for today, we're going to talk about what is the Bulk Editor, what is this new feature inside of ERwin. And then some basic functionality, introduction to the editor itself, like what do those buttons all mean. And then, of course, some demonstration around how to use the tool for doing some different kind of features. So primarily, we're looking at using it as a modeling dashboard for doing modeling updates. And then we're going to have a couple of other features showing you not only how to use it as a reporting center for your initiatives, but also how to actually use it to do those bulk updates, which is really what we wanted. So let me go into that in much more detail, and of course we're going to wrap up with the Q&A, so please do have your questions or ask your questions as you go forward, and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. So, so the Bulk Editor itself. What is the Bulk Editor? This is a tool here. I guess I missed a slide there. I apologize for that. I did have a slide here with a definition of the Bulk Editor, but I'll just speak to it. The Bulk Editor actually is a new reporting feature inside of the ERwin software. Actually allows you to selectively use any metadata within the tool itself, any metadata within your model, I should say, and even model level metadata. So you might have created more metadata that you're capturing. You have full access to all of the metadata within the diagram, anything you reverse engineered from your systems, anything you've added since then, any UDPs, any model level information as well. And you create reports, tabular reports, on any of that metadata. So you can selectively select any type of metadata within the diagram, whether it's columns, whether it's tables, whether it's physical storage parameters. Report on that, see it in a tabular report, and then actually be able to, beyond what you've seen in the past, this is somewhat similar to the data dictionary that was the data browser, as it was called previously in ERwin, somewhat similar in the fact that you can actually select objects and then run tabular reports on them. A big differentiator, what really significantly differentiates it from the previous tool, is that you actually have the ability of making edits within there and actually seeing it live changes right into your actual model. importing and exporting supported from that tool, and then you can actually have other features as well, which are new in ERwin R8 in general, filtering, sorting, and unlimited redo and undo within the editor. So if you're making changes in bulk, change your mind, you've copied and pasted the wrong value, you've deleted a property and you're like, oh, I deleted the wrong table, I made a mistake here in this editor, unlimited undo and redo. So don't feel don't worry about what you're doing within the editor itself. You can always undo it if you want to step back through time, and then step forward again if you want to kind of do a little impact analysis on your changes. So how do we enable the bulk editor itself? If you don't start up ERwin right away and you don't see an actual bulk editor available as one of the panes that are showing up, you can enable it by going to the View, Windows, Bulk Editor pane option, or you could just hit the Control and the letter B, and that will make that window pop up in the lower, usually, depending on where your configuration for your display is, usually on the lower part, the lower pane of the actual ERwin editor itself. So that's how we enable it. Once you've enabled it, what you're going to see is going to be this bulk editor window like we're seeing in this particular screenshot here. So what is included here? What are the actual features within the bulk editor? So some of the key features you're going to see, the buttons that you're going to actually see for navigating this bulk editor, all the way to the upper left on that main menu bar, you have the ability of stepping forward and backwards. This is literally just the next selected option in the report. So once you have an actual report generated, you can actually step back, step forward to go to the next or previous object on the report list. Undo and redo, this is unlimited, like I mentioned before. If you've made a bunch of changes, you're assigning a new schema owner, you're renaming the table name, you're changing the UDP value for the data steward, you can make a bunch of changes, and then you can even make bulk changes, and I'll talk to much more detail about that as we go forward in the demonstrations. But this is unlimited, so you can step forward, step backwards as many times as you need to through the whole entire history of your activity within the editor. Saving and opening, this double set here of buttons, one is to save your files. This is to actually generate a report of everything that's inside of that report set that you have. So you actually can generate a report as a CSV file. The CSV file has some properties that are proprietary, so it kind of makes it readable, once again, by the same editor when it gets imported. And I'll speak to that in more detail as well. And that's actually a key feature. You can save the CSV file, you can open it in Excel, you can open it in OpenOffice, anything that's a CSV editor or a tabular editor of any kind. Make your changes to that external report, then open that back up in the same editor, and then those changes actually go in live to your model. And we'll speak to how that works in more detail. Copying and pasting, this is key within the context of the bulk editor because you actually have the ability of copying values you find inside of this editor, and you also have the ability of pasting them not only into a particular field but across multiple fields. So you can imagine that you want to assign a bunch of data stewards to a bunch of tables owned by a particular schema owner. You can do that. You can do a bulk copy paste, and we'll do that during the demonstration. This is the wizard. This is actually what enables the, activates the wizard. Actually, and we're going to look at the wizard in much more detail in the next slide. Actually talking about how you use the wizard to build a report, a brand new report. What are the features within there? And then this is how you activate that. This is the trash can. This is the delete option. It actually allows you to delete objects. So that's correct. You can actually do like a column report, for example, locate a specific column you're looking for, and then delete it through this interface. And this is going to be the first demonstration I'm going to show you is really how do you start using this reporting tool, not just as a reporting tool, but as a dashboard for your modeling. We've all had the experience where we're trying to make a certain set of changes to our design, and we have hundreds and hundreds of tables, thousands and thousands of columns or relationships, and how do I quickly locate just those columns I'm looking for so I can quickly delete them from my diagram. That's all I need to accomplish for today, and in the past this could sometimes take a very long time of trying to find a parent table, trying to find which one of those relationships is the one I'm looking for, etc. A very painstaking process, very, very, very simple with these new tools. So this is a new button here that actually allows you to invoke the native editor for that property. So that next icon, what it basically means is that I can select an object right from inside the editor. Anything that I have included in my report, so in this very specific screenshot, I could, for example, update the data steward value. I could assign a schema from a pull-down menu. I could rename the physical name of this table because I've included it as these properties. But what happens if I suddenly locate a table and I say, oh, you know what, I wanted to create a table-level validation rule on this table. And I actually, forgot to include it in my report. Or maybe it's really not important to the report because I only want to do this once, so I don't necessarily want to modify my report just to make one change to my model. But I would like to, since it's on top of my mind right now, I'd like to make that change before I forget. You can actually just select the object here, click that button. It will open the native editor for that object, whatever the object happens to be. You can make the changes in that editor, exit out of that editor, and then you're right back where you were before. So once again, it's a dashboard for my modeling needs. Help is pretty straightforward. By the way, just you've seen the previous versions of ERwin, like if you are inside this editor and you hit the F1 key, or any editor, by the way, if you're in a particular editor in ERwin, maybe it's a new editor you're not familiar with, you're curious to know, well, what do these features mean? Hit the F1 key, function 1 on your keyboard, and this will open the help menu specific to that editor that you're looking at. So this is just general. You click on that help menu and it just opens the help dialog. But remember to use F1 when you're in a particular editor, and you'll get context-specific help. And finally, filter. If you're not using this already, if you've upgraded to ERwin R8 and you're not using the filter in all of the editors, you really should start using that. This is available in all the editors that you'll have in the tool, and very powerful here. Of course, you can, for example, filter down on just one data steward in this option set here. Look for a specific table name, and you can filter down just on that subset of objects. And I'll show you that in more detail in the demo. But by the way, I just want to add that that filter feature is available in all your editors. So if you open the table editor and you're like, wow, there's 400 tables here. I only wanted to look for this one. There's the same exact filter functionality in the upper right-hand corner of all of those editors, whether it's columns, whether it's domains, whether it's tables. Definitely use it. It's going to save you a lot of time. So the bulk editor wizard itself. So like I mentioned before in the previous screenshot, to build a report, you need to invoke the bulk editor wizard. Once you click that button and the wizard opens, this is what you're going to see. I'm going to walk you through the different features you're going to see in that editor, and then we're going to go into demos. So the first tab, overview. This is something you should read up on at least once. Kind of gives you a nice overview of what the editor actually does. A lot of the information I'm going to give you right now is going to be available here if you need a refresher. It's pretty extensive. It gives you a good list of options as to what's going on in that in the editor itself. Object types. So this is a big differentiator from what we saw, once again, going back to the old data browser technology. You actually can have access to all of the metadata in your diagram. So in the past, the data browser had to be updated on a regular basis to add new metadata as new features in the tool were being added. But as we're seeing the demonstration itself, you're seeing a one-to-one correlation. The information that's reported in that editor actually has a live impact on all the editors on the actual display of my diagram. So this is a much tighter integration of the metadata in my diagram, the tool itself that manages that metadata, and the rest of the diagram. So to that point, as you upgrade, everything that gets added to the tool, if new metadata is added, if you've added new UDPs, whatever the behavior is, it's always going to appear here. So it's not like you have to wait for another service pack so that I could run a report on the new property. It's always going to be available there. So that's the first point. All these different object types are available. For example, here I've selected table, but you could select any kind of object that exists in the diagram at all. And then property types. So property types are the properties specific to that selected object type. So for example, tables, in this case, we are seeing like physical storage properties, like the file group in this example, the do not generate option, the different UDPs that I've created. So for example, I have a data steward that I have as a UDP here, so I'm going to generate a report that's going to include that. All of this information will be available, for reporting purposes. All the properties that exist for that specific object. Also notice towards the top of the presentation, we see that this is, tables and data stewards is just the name of this report. And this is another key feature. If you're running these reports and you want to run these reports on a regular basis, there are certain reports that are very valuable to your business users or to yourself when you're navigating your model. Don't rebuild these reports over and over and over again. Obviously, there's a lot of options here. You may want to create very, very discrete types of reports to cover very different topics. Don't get locked down in having to rebuild this every single time. Simply, build them, save them. You can save them into your diagram, or you can even save them as XML files, and then you can share that same XML file across multiple diagrams. So definitely save them. You want to reuse them. You don't want to necessarily have to build these over and over and over again. Object instances. You can just select every single table in the diagram or any object. Actually, in this case, it is tables, but it could be columns, it could be UDPs, it could be any type of property that you're specifically trying to report on. By default, you can just select at the topmost level, select everything for reporting purposes. But you can be selective. So maybe there's a subset of tables you want to report on. You can definitely use this here to be more selective about it. Display order, pretty straightforward. You can rearrange the columns that are going to be returned into any order you like. You don't have to stick to this, what you specify here, by the way. When you get to the final editor, you'll see you can just drag and drop the columns around like you would expect in any kind of straightforward editor to rearrange that column order. But you can suggest a column order here in this editor. And then user settings. So what do these user settings actually mean? Automatically update current selection set means that if you select this option, anything that you've updated in the editor will automatically impact diagram while you're still in the editor. Normally you have to exit the editor. By selecting that, you can do it from within the active editor. So that's what that option does. Second one, include owner path column for better model context. This is actually very useful depending on what report you're running. If you're running a report on an object that is owned by another object or has a direct relationship to another object, you definitely want to include this. So the most obvious example I can give you is columns, right? So if I want to say I want to include the owner path for that column, that means I want to include the table as well. And of course, that's going to be very useful when you run that report, because the column name, you may have the same column name in 3 or 4 different tables. If I include the model context, I know that this is the table that that column exists on. And I'll show you that during the demo to illustrate that more clearly. Always auto-check name property and physical name property. What that means, auto-check is not like validate check. It's like check, like checkbox check. I hope that's clear. But basically what that means is that by turning those options on, rather than having to go and like look at that huge list of options and say, I always want to include physical name, which you probably always do want to include as part of your report, just turn this checkbox on and it will automatically turn it on for all of your reports. It saves you one click and it just ensures that you don't forget to include it if you have a very complex report to run. And then limit width of wide data columns. I also suggest turn that option on. What it does is actually restricts the column width to 200 pixels. You can resize it if you want to afterwards, but by default, it'll lock it down to 200. So you can imagine if you include comments, and you don't turn this on, and the comments have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of characters, obviously that column is going to eat up the whole entire screen space. By turning this on, you'll have a much smaller column that's locked down, and then you can expand it as you need to. And of course, you can always invoke a separate editor for the comment editing, and I'll show you that as well. But that's good to turn on just to have a nice, neat report when you get to your final result. So what can you do within the editor itself? You can rename strings. So for example, here I've actually highlighted the word employee. And if I actually started typing in a new value there, it would actually change the value of that physical name in my actual editor. I could, in the schema pull-down menu, and you'll see there will actually be a pull-down menu wherever you see discrete values. If you have any kind of data types, for example, or domains, if you have, ERwin has a pull-down editor available to you. When you get into this tabular report, it's not just going to be text. It's going to actually give you a pull-down to very conveniently give you the available values there to update those properties. And of course, that's the pull-down right there. That's that little arrow indicating that. And and I also wanted to mention that the data steward, for example, can also be updated here. So UDP values as well. Basically, wherever you see that bluish box towards the right with that expanding arrows. Those are basically string values that can be updated. And by clicking that little blue box, and we'll see that in the demo, you can actually invoke just a text editor for conveniently typing in text, and it even has spell check. So really nice, convenient way of navigating through this metadata. Other functions. You'll be able to see, that you're going to be able to do copy and paste across multiple fields. So you can actually copy a value from one field and then highlight a whole bunch of other fields and say paste. And you can actually paste it into multiple different fields at once, thus the bulk editor. Right-click on the column headers for bulk options, such as name hardening. This is another thing that's been a pain point. What if you have a bunch of tables that you want to name harden on? This was not the easiest thing to do in the past. You can now run a report, select the objects you want to name harden, right-click on the upper column, and there's a name hardening option right there. Do it all at once. Bulk changes in one central dashboard. Paste across multiple fields, like I mentioned before. You can do that not only from the context of selectively selecting fields, but from the header, and I'll show you that in more detail. Unselect and select. So maybe you have anything that has a explicit checkbox for physical only, logical only, etc. You can actually, from the column header, right-click, and you can do a select all, unselect all. So once again, very convenient way of making bulk changes. And then there's other features as well that are specific to those properties. So maybe something that's a string will have a different set of options than something that's a radio box, radio select, I should say. So it's a very different option there, and those will be specific to the particular properties that you're looking at. So we're going to go into demonstrations in just a minute. The bulk editor as a modeling dashboard, that's pretty much central to all of the exercises I'm going to be showing. But I wanted to show you some other ways that I've used this when I've gone on consultations, and also I've seen other people using it and discussing it with me in conversations. So not only is this this concept of the modeling dashboard, but changing exported files for model updates. So this is pretty straightforward. We had an example where someone wanted to update all their physical names to camel case. And there was a very convenient way of doing that by exporting a result, using Excel, just quickly making a modification, just a find replace, and then bringing it right back into ERwin again for import. And then bulk changes for other things as well. Not only bulk changes for definitions or something like that, but bulk changes for the actual properties of the model. So for example, you may want to change your display properties for themes. If you're using themes, maybe there's a subset of objects that you want to apply a particular theme to, so you can see it right within your design. You can do that here. Maybe you want to make changes, and this is something that a lot of people have requested. Maybe I want to have the same physical storage parameters for all the tables owned by a particular schema owner, for example. Another thing that I might want to do, I can do that here as well. So we'll do that in the demo. So let's get into the demo. We have about a little more than half an hour. Hopefully we'll knock these out pretty quickly, and then we can get into our Q&A. So I'm going to start my first demonstration here with my handy-dandy eMovies model, which everybody's familiar with. Here's the bulk editor as it normally appears in the lower pane of my window. I'm going to leave it as it is docked. I can undock it if I want to. I can auto-hide it if I want to. But for the purposes of our demo, I'm going to leave it in this native location. So let's create a new report. I'm going to invoke this through the bulk editor. And I'm going to create a column report here. And I'm going to include some property types. I'm going to include my attribute owner, for example, which is a UDP value. I'm going to include my comments. I'm going to include my data types, if I can find them here, physical data type, my null option, and I'll see whether it's physical only or not. And you can see that basically everything that's supported, everything that's in here is actually available from this menu. This changes, obviously. This is a SQL Server model. If this was an Oracle model, this properties would look differently, the available models here. And then, of course, I can save this result if I wanted to. If I want to rerun this in the future, I can save it as an external XML file and then browse to a specific location. or I can save it inside my model, and I can call it a column report. And it'll be available the next time I open this diagram back up. So of course, if you want to run this on a regular basis, you have the ability of doing that by building these reports so they're available in the future. So my object instances, I'm going to select, like I mentioned before, at the top level, I'm going to turn this checkbox on. If I expand this, I'm going to see every single column and table in my diagram. I'm going to just turn this checkbox on at the root level. That selects everything. And then my display order, like I mentioned before, I can rearrange this if I want, but I can rearrange it after the fact too, so I'm going to leave it as it is right now. And by default, like I mentioned, especially for a column report, very useful to include owner path, and we'll see why when I actually click this edit button, which gives me my result set. I'm going to expand this so everybody can see. When I actually look at this, I see that I have this tabular report. So here's my owner path. It actually is my table name, so I actually wanted to include that. And now, of course, I can sort on any one of these. So I can sort on my table name, for example. Here's my customer, customer credit, etc. I can sort on the name of the column, the type of object. In this case, it's only columns. We can include multiple different object types, although I prefer to generate reports on unique object types for the most part. But let me go back and sort this again by the owner path here, which is the table name, and then see what I can do within these editors. So you notice here, I can actually change. I included my physical data type. I actually can change my data type right here from a nice, convenient pull-down menu. Very nice way of navigating that. I can change my null option, another useful piece of information, obviously. I can change, here's my comments, which I've included, and I can actually invoke this editor here. Once again, using this blue box here to the right. And we'll notice, there's something else that's really interesting, that this is opening it, and this actual definition is based on the ERwin macros. So if you update ERwin macros values, you can actually see the expanded version of it within the editor. So if I make the modification here to the macros, or if I explicitly type in a string, of course, that'll make the update. You'll also notice there's a spell check here, so if I wanted to actually put in explicitly a new string here to say customer number unique to customer. And I can just do spell check. You'll notice there's nothing there, but if I misspelled customer or number or something like that, and I did my spell check, you'll see it's going to suggest number, it's going to suggest customer. So making changes. Oh, I made a mistake there. Let me undo that. I'm not sure why it's inserting a number there. But the spell check there, so it's available from within the editor itself. So the, and once again though, but if you do copy and paste, if you're curious, if you do use macros, by the way, if you do copy and paste macro values across multiple editors, you will actually see the expansion of validating along those lines as well. So also, like I mentioned before, you actually have the ability of making changes that are available to you from the root object up here, the actual headers of the columns. So for example, if I had, if you right-click up here, you can actually paste text. Wherever you can enter free text by, basically, you can actually have the ability of right-clicking and doing a paste on every value within the column all at one time. Like I mentioned before, if you have discrete values defined in the within the header, like physical only, you have the ability of removing physical only on selected rows. So if you actually select rows, you can actually remove the checkbox or actually select the checkbox. In this case, it's unselected. But if it was selected, you could actually do that as well. So if you're selecting multiple fields and you do multiple field selections simply by hitting the Shift select like you normally would, and then, of course, you can remove that property or add it to each of those rows. Once again, the UDP value here for attribute owner is simply another string value, so it has value there. But now speaking of this filtering, like I mentioned before, if you're looking for a particular column, you might be looking for customer state. You see I've pinpointed on just those particular columns simply by typing this into the filter options up top. You might want to look for, maybe I want to look for columns that are of a particular data type. So maybe I want to put an integer, misspelled it. And we'll see just the integer there. There's quite a few of them, but we actually can do integer search there. You can search on the comments, so maybe you might have table names that are not very easy to understand what they actually represent, but maybe your comments are very strong, and within the comments you wanted to look for a particular business value or business rule, I should say. And if you do a search on that business rule, then you would filter down on only comments that were specific to that business rule. So useful there as well. Of course, you can in the UDP values as well. So anything that you've returned in the report. So if I actually enter like Tom here as an attribute, as one of my attribute owners, and now I filter on Tom, I see that Tom is selected here in my results set. So a useful way for actually navigating within those, within the editor itself to actually navigate and locate objects within your report. And of course, this is a wildcard search, so if I put in zip code, I actually see customer zip code and store zip code as well, but that's fine. I was actually looking for anything related to zip code, so it becomes a useful way of doing this. If I had included, parent domains, I could have filtered on that as well. So anything you want to return in the report becomes like a quick way of locating the objects you're looking for. And like I mentioned before, what if I actually want to edit this object and there's some properties that I've forgotten to include? I can actually select that particular column and then click on this editor here, and then it takes me directly to the specific editor for that column. And I'll see now I have access to all of the properties within that particular object. So it gives me a lot more flexibility on how I want to do that. So that's the first demo I wanted to show you. So this becomes like a dashboard where I can quickly identify those objects. Like I mentioned before, one last thing quickly is I can also delete objects here as well. So if I wanted to, let me take my, let's look for employee number. Actually, let's not do that. Let's look for employee email. And I'm selecting employee email because I can actually see it here and towards the top. And if I actually deleted that object, there it is. It just disappeared. You'll notice that there's no longer employee column here in my employee table. And if I want to undo that, I just click undo. And now it's back here and it's back here. So a direct interface live changes to your model, and also use this as, if you want to do some little impact analysis, you can do that here as well. And then remember, just undo, redo as you see fit. So that's the first demo I wanted to show you. And for me, to be totally honest, it's probably the most useful usage of the tool for me is just navigating around a very large model, very convenient way of making changes that sometimes, I mean, I honestly sometimes would take 10, 15 minutes locating a table in a very large design. I inherit a model that someone copied and pasted tables into, and there's 2 or 3 customer tables in the diagram, and I don't even know this until I make an update and I don't see it somewhere else. And you know what? I could have just run a report, typed in the word customer, and immediately seen that there were 3 customer tables. So just a much easier way of validating your model, navigating your model. So next key feature, actually exporting this metadata. So not just for reporting purposes, but for model changes too. Let me show you a small diagram I have open here. Not that one, that's a huge model actually. Here's a small model I have open, just a few tables. And my job is that I need to actually, we have a spreadsheet that has some definitions in it already, and I need to get those definitions into my design. So how do I do that conveniently? So I got some table definitions. What I'm going to do here is create a new report. I'm going to make a table report. I'm going to include my comments and the physical name, although honestly I don't need to include physical name here, but I will anyway, just to include something else. I'm going to select all the tables by default. I'm not going to include the owner path. The model is just going to simply give me the model name over and over and over again. You might want to do that if you actually end up merging reports where you have 4, 5, 10 models all reporting together. It's kind of a more advanced topic, which I'm not going to go into more detail here. But if you did decide to do that, you can always include the model name as part of your report, and that's going to allow you to merge multiple model diagrams into one spreadsheet. I click the edit button, and it's very straightforward. I have my very small report here, just with the physical names, the object type, which is table. This is why I said I really didn't need to include the physical name, because by default, the object name will be always part of the result. and then, of course, the comment field, which is blank, because I have not created any comments for this. I'm actually going to report on this result set here. I'm going to save the selected rows to CSV using that button there. I'm going to save this as I'm going to call this webinar. Probably used that before, so let's do comment edit. I'm going to save that on my desktop. Do I want only selected rows? You'll see I actually had selected only one. I'm going to say no because I want to include all of them. And if you do say no, by the way, you will just include everything in your result, which is normally what you're probably going to want to do anyway. I'm going to run my Excel. But of course, you could use OpenOffice or any other tools you may have around. Most people will have Excel, and it's probably the way you will be interacting with these CSV files. I'm going to actually open this file. And I'll see if I can remember what I called it, something with comment in the front. Comment edit. And a few pointers here when you actually get the result set. So when you actually go to share this with the rest of your team members, there's a few things you're going to notice that are interesting. You're always going to see this prefix column here that has these ID numbers. You do not want to delete this column. These IDs are unique identifiers that uniquely identify those objects in your reports to the ERwin tool itself. If you delete this, you cannot integrate your system afterwards. You could always, of course, hide it. If you don't want people to see it, that's fine. Just do a hide, but do not delete it because you want that metadata to come back during the import process. Our comments, this is my field for my comments, and I can actually start putting in terrible definitions. Please do never grade me on these definitions because I'm just doing this for purposes of quick, quick demo. And now you also see these table objects here. Once again, you can hide that if you want because it's always going to be the same property. So you can even change this header up here. You'll see that there is a object ID that prefixes the column name. You can modify this as well. Once again, don't delete it though because you do need it for reintegration into ERwin later. So I've created some comments here in the diagram or in the spreadsheet, I should say. And now I want to import this back into my design. So I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to save this as a CSV file, which is automatically defaults to, and we'll just call this edit out. And this is like one you've probably always seen if you've ever saved to CSV. It says it's not, going to include all the Excel features. Do you want to keep the workbook in this format? And you say yes. I'm going to exit out. Yes. So I've saved my file. So now I want to be able to actually open that in from that CSV file. So I now have my comment edit out. And you'll see here are my comments, the ones I just entered in that spreadsheet. But much more importantly, here they are. Oops, sorry. Table properties. Here they are in my actual editor. So you can imagine this is a much, much easier way of updating this. In the past, this was probably pretty painstaking. And now, by the way, you can do this for anything. Anything in the tool, anything that you have to populate. You've probably reached out to the support team in the past if you've used ERwin. You're trying to use those APIs, many of them which I wrote when I was back in the support team. But, you had to have the API. Sometimes the APIs had to be enabled. Sometimes your company wouldn't allow it. So there's all these features with trying to use the API to do a lot of this. Now, not only can you actually do this relatively straightforward, very simple way of doing this, you can actually send these spreadsheets to people who do not have access to ERwin, who don't work in your team. They can populate these fields. As a matter of fact, if they sort those fields to match the columns in your report, they can pretty much just copy and paste it into the Excel spreadsheet, open it back up in ERwin, and make the changes live. But there's other things you can do with this too. Like I mentioned before, and a very specific example of this, We wanted to create camel case syntax in ERwin. If you've tried to do that in the past, you probably noticed that if you use ERwin's default naming conventions, what you end up doing is that you can have that initial letter in capitals, but once you remove spaces, it only capitalizes the first letter and you don't end up with camel case. So what we did in that instance, we generated a report, physical table names, physical column names. We simply exported it. Then we took just right in Excel, just that column itself. We said remove spaces. Spaces got removed. Open the file back up in ERwin, and then boom, update camel case on all your objects in your diagram. And it was as simple as that. There's no, it took no more than 8 minutes or less possibly for the whole entire process. So very powerful way of doing that. So key takeaways, you can update any objects types, not just comments, but I guarantee you 90% of you out there are probably going to do this primarily with your comments. Generate the report, send it to your business users who don't have ERwin installed. They can enter the information there, open it back into ERwin. If you find that after you import it, you actually look at this and you're like, oh my God, these definitions are completely wrong. Victor gave me terrible, terrible definitions. Look at this, part def, that's a horrible definition. Right? So I don't want to actually implement this to my model. Once again, undo, it's gone. So simple as that. Don't worry about it. You're not going to damage your model. I can redo it just as easily. So once again, use these tools together. This is like a Swiss Army knife of options here. Try to come up with ways of using these tools together, to facilitate your day-to-day activities. All right. So other things I can do. Another key thing I can do in my diagram is we can do bulk changes within the diagram itself. I know we're running a little short on time. Let me show you a couple of these features. One of these I may not have time to do. So let me show you one that I have ready to go. And what this is applying table spaces across multiple diagrams. So I actually have my Oracle. This is actually, look at the size of this model. This is actually an Oracle XE reverse engineer, which has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tables in it, and thousands of relationship lines. Much bigger model than I anticipated, to be honest with you. But let's see what we can do here to navigate this massive model. I actually want to change some table space information, the definitions. Oftentimes, you probably have this experience where you have a particular subset of tables, and you actually want to assign those tables, those changes, I should say, to the particular storage parameters for just some Oracle table spaces on some objects in my Oracle diagram. So how do I actually do that? I'm going to generate a new report here. My object type this time is going to be my physical storage objects. My property types is going to be my Oracle table space. You can include percent free, percent increase, maybe my min and max extents, initial, and you get the idea. You can include anything here that basically is related to your that particular object. Object instances, we'll see there's a whole bunch of different storage properties here. Display order, and user settings. Now, user settings here, once again, I am going to include the owner path because I want to include that table that owns that particular property, and we'll see what happens here when I click Edit. So the owner path, of course, is the actual table name that I'm looking for. I'm going to put that here at the beginning. I could just sort on it more conveniently. Regular storage, physical storage objects. I really don't care about these. What I'm really concerned about is this, percent used and the table spaces, etc. So you can imagine in the past, maybe you have a design where you need to change all of these at once. Maybe you're moving everything from a temp table space into your production table space. Or maybe you're renaming a table space, or it has been renamed and you want to update your design in your diagram to reflect that. Or maybe you have a design with no physical storage parameters, so everything we're going to see here is completely blank, but I actually want to make that modification. So I'm actually going to sort on the table space name itself, and I'm going to scroll down to users. And I kind of knew I was expecting to see that there. That's why I kind of scrolled down for it. And I see here's these tables related to the table space users. Now, what if I want to change the table space that's allocated to that user's table space? What I can do here, let me go to my pull-down menu. I'm actually going to go to this, selected this on.tbs1, which is just one of my table spaces. And I'm actually going to just copy that string value. Actually, I could do it here as well. I went into a separate editor to copy that. But let me just show you. You can actually just right-click, and you see how it says copy this cell. And you can copy it as text as well if you want to copy it into something else. But I'm actually going to copy the cell value there. And now I'm going to highlight every one of these that has users. And I'm actually going to right-click. And I'm going to copy, I'm sorry, not copy, I apologize, paste to Oracle tablespace on regular storage and you see specific to this one field or to all the selected rows. And if I do that, now look what I've just done. I've updated them all to have the same value. So I could have done the same thing with the %free value, with the initial value, with the min extents. I could define max extents for all of these if I wanted to, % increase, etc. So this is something that people have demanded for a very long time. And it's something you actually have the ability of doing now in the tool. You can actually do this type of thing where you can selectively locate, pinpoint a subset of objects you want to, make bulk changes to them. And it's not just around, bulk changes to, this physical storage property. Definitely, physical storage objects are going to be key. This is something that I know personally people have requested many, many times before. But let me show you a different instance of, where you can do something similar. And then this is going to be a very quick demo. I'm going to try to make this one as brief as possible, and then we will take your questions. I'm sure you have some questions out there. So this report I'm going to create this time is going to be a table report. I'm going to include my, let me uncheck my physical storage properties. I'm going to include my owner, was what I was looking for. There it is. You see that storage, parallel and other partition types, etc. But I'm going to make this relatively simple. I'm going to make this like my owner, my physical name. And I'm just going to do that only because what I'm going to show you here is how you can use the same technique we just used right now to actually update schema owner, for example. So what I can do is, once again, this is actually a huge model, much bigger than I expected it to be honest with you. But I'm going to filter on the HR schema. And if I filter on the HR schema, I could actually change this to HR1 or some new schema that I've created. And then similarly, I can copy, and then I can highlight all of these HR. And I can paste text to owner on all selected rows. And now I've updated my schema owner on all those tables. Once again, something that we could do in the past, but we'd have to go into many, many different editors and remember to do it. So, we couldn't even validate the process because maybe I updated 15 of my tables, but there was a couple of them I forgot. And there was no way of knowing that until I actually forward engineered my SQL, and there were all these issues with what I actually saw during the forward engineer process. So what I'm actually doing here is using the tool itself, in combination, using these tools in different ways to give me that value. And of course, the one feature I didn't really get around to showing you that I did want to include is that this isn't just for physical objects. So in this case, it's probably where you guys are mostly going to be using it, is to update actual properties. But for example, I could have included themes. So themes are related to the actual display of my object, like what color is it going to have, how are the foreign key objects going to migrate, what do my alternate key index, what color do I use to identify these columns as alternate key members, etc. I define that in a theme, and if I want to do bulk changes as well, I simply click Edit here. Now themes are included, and you can see from my pull down, I can select default theme here. We're not going to see it considering how far out I'm magnified, but I can do the exact same technique. I can actually copy this cell value, theme, and then select all of these included objects here, and then I can paste them all to all. And there we go. I've now updated my themes on all of those objects. So you can imagine how useful this could be. You could be filtering objects based on a subject area. You could be filtering objects based on a schema owner. You could be filtering objects based on many different filter options, and then make bulk changes to them. So that's pretty much all I have to show. Hopefully this is something that you can really see the value of it. I find it really exciting technology. It really facilitates a lot of the things that were more painstaking in regard to my past processes, and I know customers have been, crowing about their way that they're using the tool. And so just to wrap things up before we get to the Q&A, takeaway points: bulk editing allows more flexibility in accessing, sharing, and updating those model objects, the metadata within there. And then think outside the box. Think like, how can I use some of the things that I just showed you right here? Hopefully I've planted a seed in your mind to think like, you know what, there's these things I do over and over and over again. Every single day I get like these lists of 4 or 5 model changes I need to make, and it's been like a painstaking process for me. Sometimes it takes me an hour or two to make a handful of changes. Kind of hopefully some of the techniques I've shown you right here will allow you to make those changes very quickly to the design changes. And think outside the box. How do I generate reports from that metadata, share it with my other team members, allow them to impact my day-to-day changes, outsource some of that painstaking information I have, send it out to somebody else, have them update that spreadsheet, import those changes back in. And so there's some outside the box thinking of using that software. And I just wanted to last, if anyone wants to contact me, have any questions, the easiest way to get to me is to just, you can just Google search Maximum Data Modeling. You'll find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on my blog as well, which has some interesting articles there around some of these techniques. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
All right, great presentation, Victor. Thank you. We do have a lot of questions, so we will try to get to as many as possible. The first one is, can I add new tables using bulk editor versus only updating existing ones?
Right now, that's a great question. As of this point, there's no method of adding new objects yet, and I say yet. For now, it's only updating existing objects. You can delete objects, so you can delete a whole table, delete table spaces, delete any objects. However, creating new objects is not yet supported, although I do anticipate it in a future release.
Okay. Are the physical storage parameters new? I was not able to find this, and I just received an API to modify them from CA.
I believe this is new. I am actually demoing, what I was demoing right there was actually the 8.2 release, which is available, I believe, about a week and a half, give or take. So within 2 weeks, I'd say, we'll go GA with that release, or they'll go GA with that release, but I do have a preview version of it. And I personally did have issues in the past, similar issues with updating those physical storage parameters and such. So I do believe that is new. But if your current version doesn't support it, the release, which is imminent within a few weeks, will have that in there. So you'll be able to do exactly what I showed during the demonstration.
Okay. Can you use the import to add new domains?
No, once again, creating new objects similar to the table properties, not yet. There is an API, I'm sure, and maybe whoever asked the question is already using that API. There is an API that allows you to do that. Currently, there is no method of doing that. There will be, also with this 8.2 release, by the way, and this is kind of a little preview of 8.2, there'll be a blog post on all the new 8.2 features, by the way, if anyone's curious. And I'll send an announcement out to anybody who follows me on LinkedIn. You'll get an announcement when that blog post is written. But there is the ability of creating these ERwin templates, which we've already had in the past, but having auto-sync to ERwin templates. So I bring that up because now there's the capability of having the concept of a model, a particular model, being like a global data dictionary for your other diagrams. And then your diagrams can auto-sync to that, so you can automatically import domains and stuff. So it's another technique for what you're describing. But right now, once again, currently, there is no way through that editor of creating new objects in a diagram. So not something that's currently supported, but I do anticipate that change in a future release.
All right. How can the PK or FK indicator be included on a column report similar to the one you generated? Can the subject area be reported or updated through the bulk editor?
As far as the PK, you can run a report at the column. There actually is one of the options is primary key. And maybe that's in the new release too, so maybe I'm seeing something that is not yet GA, so I apologize if that's the case. But there is the ability of turning that on there, and then of course it is a radio box that can be turned on or turned off. The FK designator, by the way, you can report on it, but you cannot update it in the editor, obviously, well, not obviously, maybe it isn't obvious, but the FK is actually designated based on a relationship line between two tables. So that's not something you can do within the editor, but you can report on it. And like I said, once again, that may be in my current release, so I apologize if that's not the case in your current build.
Okay. Are view data type properties available?
Are view data type properties available? And I'll answer that first, and then I'll go back to something I forgot to answer on the previous question. View data type properties, I'm not certain. I'll have to double check on that for you. I haven't, to be honest with you, I probably never generated a report that included the view data types. But I would assume so. I would assume so because it is a property within the actual view editor, but I could be wrong about that. So let me double check that. Going back to the previous point that I forgot to include, you can report on subject area membership for a table, and there's certain strategies there, but you can't update it. So that's a field that cannot be updated in the report. So going back to the previous question, someone asked if you can actually report on it. Yes. Can you actually update those values? No, you cannot. So.
Okay. Do changes made in Excel maintain inheritance when they are applied, such as changes to the definition?
Yes, they do. So you'll actually see that where if you have inheritance between two objects, they will automatically include that. It's the same behavior you would see in the actual editor. So for example, actually during the demo itself, I actually updated a definition on email or something like that, and we actually saw it updating in another area as well because that was actually inheriting from the parent column. So the behavior in the model will be preserved. However, it's just like entering the values into the editor itself. So let's say that I created a value for the parent object, and then I created a value that violates that inheritance in the child value, then I will be breaking that inheritance in the model itself. It's exactly the same thing as if I went into the editor and I typed in a new value. So, let's say that I have the behavior in the diagram is that this definition propagates from the parent column. Then the value will be there and there will be an inheritance. But now if I go into that editor and I overwrite it with a new name that violates that value, then it will block it. And similarly, I cannot violate model properties through there either. So let's say that I've renamed all my columns, but I have them hardened inside the diagram, then they simply will not work. Just like if I went into the editor and I typed in a string, I'll get an error message saying that the names are hardened. So I can't violate what's inside the diagram. And the behavior would be just basically a more convenient way of doing what I'm doing in those individual editors. So that's how it works.
Okay. I have the impression that the bulk editor would work across models. In other words, either having access to a library of models or to Model Manager. How far can it work with multiple models, especially not having them all loaded?
The bulk editor right now is a tool that exists within the editor itself. It's working within your open session. So there's no way currently of running bulk edit changes against the repository. And that is something that we're going to probably see functionality around that with the Model Manager 9, which is scheduled for summer of 2012, so about 9 to 10 months from now. So basically, a lot of modifications to the metadata within the Model Manager, but I would assume that those editors that are going to give you access to those bulk changes, bulk reporting across the Model Manager itself, when that new Model Manager is introduced, that's going to be a separate editor. I just from looking at the infrastructure of the tool, this bulk editor tool is sitting on top of your current active session of ERwin. So I don't think that this is going to be the method of doing that, and it currently does not support it.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. When you import an edited file back in, is that a new model or does it update an existing model and preserve layout, etc.?
I'm sorry, could you reread that to me again?
Yep. When you import an edited file back in, is that a new model or does it update an existing model and preserve layout?
Oh, no, that's updating your live model. Yeah, so just like we saw in that demo, the definitions actually, were imported into that model. And as a matter of fact, it can only be imported into that model. If you accidentally open a report for a different model, and you open it back and you open it up, it'll open in that tabular report, but nothing in the diagram will update, and you'll get an error message basically saying that there was no objects not found, basically. And the reason I mentioned that is at the very beginning of that export demonstration, I said you can hide that first column, but don't delete it. Those unique identifiers uniquely identify that column information to that diagram. So what you're doing is you're updating the actual diagram itself. You are not creating a new diagram. So it's not like you may have had a situation using the Meta integration tool in the past where you would import that, it would create a brand new diagram, and then you had to do a complete compare across diagrams. You do not have to do that anymore. It literally is opening the spreadsheet and done. It's simple as that. You don't even have to click any other buttons. You just open it and you've updated your model. And you are not creating a new diagram. That's changes to a live environment.
Okay. The owner path for table report is model, not SA. How do you include the SA in a table report?
How do you include, is it SA, like?
Yeah.
If you want to include, I believe the question is referring to including the actual schema owner. You can include that. That would be a table property itself. So in the table report, one of the table properties would include that would be, depending on your database, like Oracle, it'll be, would say owner. The actual property would say owner. If you're doing SQL Server, and I assume you are, given that it's SA.
They're saying it's subject area.
Oh, subject area. Okay. So how do they include? Oh, how do you include subject area as your report? The table has a property. Well, there's two options. One is you can run a subject area report and include the tables members that are within it. Another option is in the table editor, you can, there's a property there that says dependent objects or something like that, and that would include the subject areas as a property, one of the dependent objects, but you would have to do some filtering afterwards to filter on the specific subject areas. That would give you a result of all the subject areas, basically. All the tables and then all the subject areas in which they reside. Excuse me, and then you could do a filter by actually typing in the subject area name, and then it'll filter down to the specific subject area. So that would be the technique I would describe, I would suggest.
Okay, and the last question for the day is, does the bulk editor operate only at the model level? Can it also operate at the model mart repository level? Can it report on the ERwin meta model itself? And then can one undo or redo changes made in prior sessions or just the current session?
To the first point, whether it works in the model manager, it does not, like I mentioned before. That might be something we see in the future, but not the case right now. Does it impact, can you work on previous sessions? No, you cannot. Basically, just like you would use think about the functionality level is a central dashboard for everything you would be doing within hundreds of different editors in ERwin. But just like the same limits apply. So my undo, my redo within my current session, my update objects within my current model, my my session changes, like can I undo a previous session? No, you'd have to use the model manager functionality as far as going back to a previous version. So the bulk editor is a central method of accessing basically every single editor within your model in one convenient location, but it doesn't add functionality as far as spanning diagrams, accessing model manager metadata. And the last point you mentioned, can you report on model metadata? Yes, there's a lot of model metadata that you can report on beyond the scope of just the diagram metadata itself. So there are reports you can run that will include model metadata. I can't think off the top of my head really useful model metadata you probably want to get your hands on other than like the UDPs. You might want to run a report relating to UDPs. But yeah, there are definitely, there are reasons to access that metadata, and a lot of it is available through those editors.
Okay. Thanks, Victor, for your presentation, and to everybody on the webinar today. If you have any more questions that we either didn't get to or you think of later, please feel free to contact us at info@techextend.com. And we want to thank everybody again for attending the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar in November. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.